Honourable Minister, we must tourism. And that can be done with the central bank. Lastly, we must intensify domestic tourism. We want to acknowledge the work done by UTB and our colleagues in this sector, and we want to thank the ministry for the improved planning that we see. The quality of the documents from the sector have improved. We want to thank you very much. I am one of the luckiest people to come from a small village, to come and address you on the tourism day. I don't think I'm the most deserving. I am hoping that I will see you again. That is if my contract is renewed, which ends very soon. If I don't see you, I'll see you in another capacity. May God bless you and enjoy the tourism day. Moderator, this was a very tough job. But you have the paper, and we can send it to you in soft copy. We have offered as the authority to improve this paper further and have it published in the best journal of tourism. And I hope that you will all contribute to improving it. Bless you all.
Thank you, Dr. Mvawara, the Executive Director of the National Planning Authority. And certainly, my words may not have enough words to put together what you've been able to give it to us. But he has pointed out something which is extremely very critical. Our takeaways today, as an industry, how are we leveraging on domestic tourism? How are we including the employees or the people in the value chain to make tourism meaningful, to make tourism inclusive, and actually also to grow the tourism sector from that perspective. Doctor, thank you so much for those very candid words, and would be happy to receive the paper, read, and also make additional contributions. Today is just a sneak peek of the paper because the day has a time frame to end, but the kind of knowledge he has shared, we could debate it for the entire year. So from that regard, I would request the ministry to ensure that the paper is available online for us to be able to read and for the other members to be able to make an input. Dr. Mvawala, we can't thank you. We only appreciate that you actually accepted to be part of this great World Tourism Day. I can see the members getting a little bit tired, and we certainly need some energizer. Yeah? We need an energizer, and I'll request you to stand up. My friend Theo from Karatunga, please come. Yeah? You're going to give us a quick energizer. Yes, my friend.
I'm going to invite actually Martijn. He's the man of the energizers.
Yes.
For me, I can dance very flexible, no problem. But energizing games, I know somebody who's very fast.
And that is Martin?
Yes, Martin, yes.
Yes. And you're also competing for the sun, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, Martin?
Sorry, Martin.
Yes. Martin, we're going to give us a quick energizer, and after the energizer, I am going to invite my brother Edem, and after Edem we shall have another energizer, and then we'll proceed like that. Thank you very much. Martin, you want us to jump to your height?
That would be very energizing. Thanks for putting me on the spot. No, I would suggest that we all grace these celebrations with a bit of rain, and not literally with rain, but by making it at least sound like it rains in this hall. So I would suggest that we start with a little drizzle by all just stepping our fingers on the palm of your hand. Please, exactly. And we can add a finger, maybe. Ah, that's a great sound, yeah. Add a third finger. Ooh, I'm feeling the rain. Do you feel it, Richard?
Yes, sir.
Let's add a fourth finger. Ooh, nice. A fifth finger. Woo! And the drizzle is just diminishing a bit. We're going back to 4. Going back to 3. Going back to 2. And going back to 1. That was a refreshing rain.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for the energizer. We are going to have Sam to give us, largely Sam's presentation is supposed to fit into Dr. Mvawara. One of our constraints as an industry is capital development finance. And given the fact that we are coming off the pandemic, as Dr. Mvawara has presented, with imminent foreclosures, we really need to listen to how does the sector access affordable financing for survival. Because if we go for foreclosures, then definitely we will not be talking about tourism tomorrow. We must ensure that the private sector survives. And there we have Sam to come and tell us what is it that is there for the Uganda Development Bank to be able to support this industry. Sam, you're most welcome.
Thank you very much, Richard. Very kind. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, honorable members, and all of us present. I had prepared the presentation, and financing is something I would probably be able to spend the whole day on, but I've been limited to a few minutes, and I'll just give you a brief background about where we're coming from as UDB and the role we can play in financing the tourism sector, not only going forward, but through these challenging times of the pandemic. So UDB, as we all know, was started in 1972. It's been around over 50 years. It's 100% government-owned, has two major shareholders, Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of State for Privatization. We have a board who report to our shareholders. We're supervised by the Parisetal Monitoring Unit, COSASE, and the Auditor General carries out our audits. Under the legal regime, we're a private limited company and registered as such. Currently, we subscribe to prudential supervision from the Associated of African Development Finance Institutions, and we are in the process of seeing how we can onboard the central bank to enable us to be supervised. As a bank, we've managed to achieve a number of things over the past years. We have a Fitch rating of B+, in line with the country rating. We have an ADFI rating across Africa as a development finance institution of A+. We are one of the most improved development finance institutions on the continent. We have demonstrated our ability to not only sustainably but responsibly manage the resources that have been given to us by the state. We have won FIRE awards, that's for financial reporting, a number of years in a row. We are also the first development finance institution on the continent that is part of the Sustainability Standards Certification Initiative. Who are we? What do we do exactly? So we were set up to profitably finance viable economic development in the country by assisting in the establishment, modernization, and expansion of key sectors, and in that process advise customers in relation to the above. We provide short, medium, and long-term financing, mostly secured loans. We acquire shareholding in viable entities That is something we do alongside the Uganda Development Corporation, but this is more on us, on the Development Bank side. We also make these funds available for reinvestment by selling on the shares we've invested in those businesses and from the collection of the loans. So our major purpose really has been to improve the quality of life of Ugandans. That is by focusing on projects that change social, economic, health, education, focus on our environment, and improve all those conditions in generally for the development of our country. We focus on three main high-impact goals, which are the reduction of poverty, and this is how we look at improving people's livelihoods through inclusive financing options. We're looking at building sustainable food systems, not only for our country, but because in this instance, for example, food is one of those elements that contributes or has potential for tourism, as we have looked at, talk of culinary schools or culinary experiences that could form part of the whole immersive tourism experience in Uganda. We are also challenged with promoting sustainable industrialization for the country. The key sectors we focused on are agriculture, industry, and tourism, because we believe these are the sectors that will take our country to the next level. There are enabling sectors within that, which is human capital development. We have all spoken about the importance of a technical and vocational institution. Do we have the right manpower to take us along this journey as we improve in tourism, as we improve and grow our industry, and how do we increase our agricultural productivity if we don't have the right technical and vocational skill? The other sector under human capital is healthcare. If we do not have a healthy population, how will we achieve all this? So these are some of the areas that we are focusing on financing. We touch a number of cross-cutting issues. These include climate change, its impact not only on tourism, for example, but on food systems, environmental and social impacts of the projects we are looking at. How do these either add or how might they potentially subtract from our beauty as a pearl of Africa or increase our potential to attract tourism? Gender and youth, this speaks largely to inclusion and the fact that we have a very large youthful population. How will we keep them actively engaged? How will we keep them earning? And how do we develop them as entrepreneurs in those key sectors? We're also looking at digitalization, and one of the very core building blocks across all these sectors is the SME sector. Small, medium enterprises grow into the larger regional, local, and international entities that not only attract people to our country, but also give us a name for our different products, for our different services. So what does the bank do in order to do this? Like I'd mentioned, we do offer term financing. We have long-term loans with the tenor of up to 15 years, which I think is the longest tenor in the market currently. Most commercial banks will do about 7 years, but we're able to push up to 15 years. We have grace periods of up to 3 years on those facilities because, like a number of you will tell us, you don't put up a lodge or hotel overnight. It takes a period of time for you to develop it, for you to build it, and so we are accommodative to up to 3-4 years depending on the specific nature of your project. We have asset finance as another product. This is where there's challenges in security for borrowers. Potentially, you will raise a bit of equity and the bank finances the balance. This is if you want to, for example, get some specialized equipment, vehicles, and the like. Other things we do are farmer group models, which we finance along value chains, which wisdom we are carrying into financing of other projects. How do we empower the value chain from the beginning all the way to the end product? And how do people along that chain benefit? I spoke to equity. Private equity is another thing we do. We do take up shares in entities, and we hold these for some time and divest them to the population later, thereby enabling people to have the ability to invest whatever savings they have and to be part of the growth story of some of the industries or companies that we have financed. So working capital, trade finance are the other things we do. We also have, on the non-financial side, two interesting and exciting products. One is project preparation. A lot of us have dreams in tourism and the like, but how do we get that dream from concept to reality? So we have a team that will sit with you and take you through this whole process, help you develop your project, help you do the write-up, help you do the feasibility, and eventually you will either choose to be financed by UDB, or you might find someone interested in taking equity in your project, or another bank would finance it. But we largely do this at our cost for projects that we are going to finance. The other is business advisory services. And if most of you were looking at the media early this year, we did have an engagement with National Chambers of Commerce and Industry and MOBS, where we had over 3,000 applicants come in to get capacity building in wider knowledge around the business environment, skills around record keeping, and implementing monitoring projects, professionalization, and formalization. So that is something else that we do. Specifically for tourism, what are our focus areas in the tourism sector? So we are looking at financing the development of accommodation facilities in game parks and tourism destinations. Our major focus for now is outside of Kampala. Based on the studies we have done, we feel like there is a need for accommodation way outside Kampala so that the tourists can engage in a more wholesome experience rather than traveling somewhere and having to come back maybe halfway down that route. So we do finance those development of the accommodation facilities. We want to look at development of ecological sites, development of heritage and cultural centers, tourist stopovers, and purchase of certain specialized tourist transport facilities and other forms of tourist equipment. If you were to access financing from UDB, what is the criteria? So business must operate in a sector that we've identified. In this case, you're operating in the tourism space. It should be registered in the country, owned by Ugandans. We will make exceptions where we see a lot of strategic development impact, if it's in terms of employment, engagement, inclusion, or meets up with any other of those key priorities that we seek, for example, import substitution or export enhancement. We will look at those projects. We are happy to look at anything from a startup to an existing business, but we must focus on feasibility, viability, and sustainability. You should have a good credit history, so we do look at the Credit Reference Bureau reports. You should be compliant with all the statutory requirements in terms of registration, returns, and other approvals. This is key because we deal with entities rather than individuals. Why do we want to deal with entities? We want to ensure that there's continuity in this business. If it is just one person, God forbid something happens to them, we don't want a project that has substantial benefit to the community to close down. So we prefer dealing with entities, and we focus on the development of those entities. When you apply for a project, for financing, there should be a substantial amount of your own contribution. How do we know you have skin in the game? So we like equity contributions depending on the nature of a project from 10 to 60%. In certain instances, there might be a need for some form of acceptable collateral, and I don't want us to limit our thinking to only land and buildings. There's a whole lot more in the collateral space. There are contracts, for example, if you have access to rolling contracts. These are all things that can be looked at to secure your borrowing beyond land and buildings, for example. In that space, we do acknowledge that there may be challenges for certain groups, and we've made accommodations for the likes of farmer groups, SMEs, and youth and women, and also considerable consideration for people in the asset finance space, if their projects have substantial development impact. Again, we also have a varied process from SMEs, so a smaller borrower will not be subjected to the level of due diligence that someone, for example, taking 30 billion would when they're taking 100 million. So that, again, speaks to the different requirements, urgency, and the like. In general, I'd mentioned our tenors are favorable. It's 15 years, it's comfortable period over which you can develop your project. You have up to 3 years of grace period for specific projects. Interest rate, I think, is currently the lowest, and that is 12%. But as we progress, we should find ways to further, get that reduced as we increase our capitalization, as we increase our capacity. For now, the minimum borrowing is 100 million, but we are in the process of developing tailored products for the SMEs and for special groups, especially youth and women, who may not be looking at projects in that space, but want simple machinery to make crafts and the like. What do you need to support your application? What documentation should come along with that? So one, I had mentioned, we deal with entities. So what do we want? Why do we want to deal with the entity? Because it gives us an opportunity to assess who you are. So we would like your constitutional documents, your resolution to borrow, which is basically the authority and mandate that your entity has to engage in contract with UDB. A feasibility report, what makes that project work? Your cash flow projections, budgets or estimates, financial statements for at least 2 years. This is mainly for existing businesses. So you remember, if you're a startup, you probably have none of those, with the exception of your constitution documents. So we will take you on board, hold your hand, and get you to the end of that journey. So the rest really is bank statements, loan statements, your credit reference bureau report. These are all, again, as we'd like you to be compliant, we too need to be compliant with requirements for borrowing and industry best practice. Again, current historical offtake agreements, just to show what kind of track record you have. Proof of NSSF compliance. Why do we stick to this NSSF compliance is like, I think Doctor mentioned in his paper that there are certain exploitative tendencies that we see in the market. So how are you catering for the people you employ beyond the time they're employable? So Social Security forms another basket, it forms another mechanism to hold these people and improve their livelihoods after they're no longer able to work. So we're also interested in your tax compliance, tax clearance, why tax and revenue to government. That is one of our key performance indicators, because we rely on government for capitalization. So we need to know that whatever we are funding will keep the taps flowing, not only for ourselves, but for the other development projects in the country. So we also look at profiles of directors and the key technical personnel. Who is it behind this project? What experience do they have? What do they bring to this, and what value can be added? In terms of procedure, you can access a form to make your application. This is either from the website or from the bank premises, if you're able to make it to Renzori Towers. And once you have completed this, you can submit it directly to the bank or electronically. We did take cognizance of the challenges around COVID, and we've made huge leaps in digitization of our operations. We also use the post-bank network across the country, and on a weekly basis, we receive applications from all over the country to be processed. So the applications are submitted for evaluation. You might be requested on occasion to provide some additional information, and after the assessment, relevant committees, either from management and the board, will look at those, approve, and take a decision. And once the decision is taken, it would be either approval, deferment, or decline, which will be communicated to you. And basically, the decisions are entirely at the discretion of the bank. What has the bank done following the COVID-19 pandemic? So we did have a a kind of a partnership with the European Union to develop a product or a hybrid product that has an element of a loan and a grant to support businesses for at least 5 years as they recover during the pandemic. What was the rationale around this? We set aside about 61.8 billion shillings, 40 billion of which was UDB owned funds, what we had projected for the tourism sector, and we got a grant from the EU of 21.8 billion for a pool of 61.8. The rationale really was to help retain and reinstate employees who might have been laid off during the COVID-19 outbreak. We wanted to preserve a number of businesses and their ability to generate tax revenue, to try and stimulate their business operations by covering most of the costs using some kind of favorable terms or favorable financing, patient capital, with the goal of preserving foreign exchange and incomes for the sector. So like I'd mentioned, the components of this were a loan and a grant based on the numbers of employees. It's a concessional loan at 12%, but effectively you'd pay 8%, given that a certain proportion of this would be covered by the non-repayable grant, provided you met the conditions of maintaining at least 50% of your staff in the first 12 months and raising that number to 75% of your employees, subject to certain caps. That loan, again, I said, is 5 years with up to 2 years grace period, which we hoped would have been sufficient to cover the worst part of the pandemic. And on top of that, we threw in advisory services. Should you need help with restructuring, reforming your business, that is also available as part of the package. The beneficiaries in this case were members of Hotel Owners Association and OTO. It is a product that was co-developed, which meant we had input from the main players and the main potential beneficiaries. They had to be businesses in the country, registered in the country, with a good credit history, some form of audited financials, to enable us to assess your financial viability, sustainability, and ability to pay the loan component while continuing operations for the duration of the facility. So again, you had to have at least 5 employees with proof of NSSF and payee payments, and then undertake to retain at least half of those in the first 12 months and increase to 75% in the next 12 months, and be compliant with all the statutory requirements. And we limited it to one group or entity because the pot we felt was not sufficient to cover the entire sector. And from our experience, not everyone was able to apply for it and get it. So we limited it to one group and a maximum of 1 billion shillings. In terms of the eligible expenditures that would be covered under the facility, main one, salaries. That was to keep some of the staff engaged, employed, at least help you keep the doors open. Running costs like utilities, costs for repairs, service, maintenance of fleet, upgrade, replacement of certain equipment and such. What we were not going to finance in that rescue package was loan refinancing, any additional construction, because for construction we have an open window under the tourism finance project, subscriptions and memberships. That basically covered it. Again, other conditions, the limit was 1 billion shillings with the loan component being repayable. We had certain brackets for maximum grant. Someone with 5 to 20 employees was eligible to a 40% grant on the total request to a maximum of 20,000 euros. Other details will be shared, all the way to someone with 100 plus employees who would get a 25% grant to a maximum of 60,000 euros. So again, we adjusted our credit assessment criteria to look at a few and not everything, given one, this was supposed to be an emergency intervention, and the fact that the times were different. It was a different type of situation that needed a different kind of thinking. So we did our assessment based on 2 years' performance, analysis of the eligible costs, looked at security availability and what could be provided and what could be shared. We also assessed the other exposures, things like same shareholding, profiles of directors, and also conducted site visits to see who was open, who had closed, and what it would take to get you back on your feet. So the current status of that project has been that we received 94 applications in all from the first call. Of that, 39 have been approved, 39 were declined, and 16 are currently being reviewed after engagement with the owners. We've disbursed about 4.8 billion in grants so far. We've also approved about 10.9 billion for loans, 15.7, which is now committed. That is in the process of finalizing the arrangements to draw that down. 25 of the applicants have received their grant, and 13 have received the loan component. And I think I'll just take the last few minutes to focus really on why applications get declined when you make a request for financing with the bank. In many instances, we see incomplete information provided. We're usually clear about what we would like, but there's hesitance to provide more detail. Therefore, we suffer with that incomplete information. We've experienced application fraud, and unfortunately, we trust you, but we always verify what you give us. So if you're one of those people who keeps 3 sets of accounts, one for the bank, one for the taxman, one for yourself, should you present us with that and we ask the taxman, we ask the audit firm, do you know these numbers? And they say no, immediately we peg you as someone who lacks integrity and we can't do business with you. So unfortunately, we've had a lot of those instances where there's been application fraud. Unfortunately, we've detected that early. There's inadequate context to business plans. Sometimes you can't do a 0 to 100 in one facility. Are you going to take it progressively? Are you willing to negotiate and build a business up progressively? So in certain instances, those facilities have been declined. Where they've had the weak financial risk profile, yes, your business is loss-making, but that is not. That is a sign that we should be worried about that. Again, poor debt service capacity. Some of you think when you transact on your personal accounts, that should be considered, but we primarily look at the project. And in many instances, we end up declining facilities. Adverse credit history, if you're not managing your other obligations elsewhere, to us it looks like a habit. So it is best that you be in the good books everywhere else before you come to UDB. The other really is around facility and security structures. But like I mentioned, we have a business advisory unit. We have project preparation who can help you in your journey to receiving facilities from UDB. So with that, I would like to thank you and mention that we are open for business, ready to finance in the tourism sector for new projects, existing projects, but we will also be having a second call under the EU scheme for impacted hotels. We've learned a number of lessons, from the whole COVID experience, what is happening, and maybe we need to revise the rationale around that intervention and see how we can reach a whole lot more than the probably about 50 people who will benefit out of the 94 that applied. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention and hand over to Richard.
Thank you, Sam. Sam is an expert in finance, and definitely he will speak that finance language. We've learned from your presentation that tourism is a key sector which you've focused on, looking at technology as an enabler and human capital, of course putting the 360 degrees with climate, environment and other issues. There's something for us to take away to pick: people in accommodation facilities, ecological sites, heritage sites, tourism stopovers. These have been a song that the tourism sector would want to develop. It comes with, I think, a lot of hope that you're putting an interest as a bank. Certainly, one of the things I'm very sure that will come to you as a question you need to think about is time frame on projects. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I happened to participate in the stimulus fund for UDB 2020. We're in 2021, 1 year later, and only 13 enterprises have been able to receive support, or call it financing. I think we need to think about that. Otherwise, you'll go to finance entities that have already collapsed and died. Thank you very much. I don't want to put you on the spot on that, but I think it's something to think about. Before we get the next presenter, I want us to get an energizer from the Mountain Rwenzori. We have something to show you in a minute, something you need to enjoy around the Mountain Rwenzori. We're going to have a sneak preview of a small clip of the Mountain Rwenzori, as I would request the executive director, the country director of WWF to get prepared. The team from the technology, can you please pass that enticing and energizing clip? Are we there? So as the clip is coming on, we're going to, okay?
Welcome to one of Africa's highest, most remote and unknown mountain ranges, located in Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. The Rwenzori Mountains, also known as the Mountains of the Moon, are stretched over 120 kilometers long and 61 kilometers wide. Come and experience Africa's most beautiful alpine area. With every hour and every altitude gain, the landscapes, colors and views are ever-changing. This UNESCO-protected national park contains unique biodiversity and breathtaking sceneries such as the bamboo zones, mossy heather zone, numerous waterfalls, tropical rainforest, mountain lakes, and eternal snow. Culminating at an altitude of 5,109 meters, the Margarita Peak is the highest point in Uganda and the third highest peak of the whole African continent after Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya. This mystical and demanding mountain range is located on the foothills of Queen Elizabeth National Park, one of Africa's most popular game drives, and a few hundred kilometers from the Bwindi impenetrable forest that inhabits the endangered silverback mountain gorillas. Rwenzori Mountains offers trails for all levels of hikers, which range from 1-day to 10-day trips. The shorter trips are not as physically demanding and still showcase the amazing beauty in the art of nature, including rare vegetation, rivers, and numerous waterfalls. This unique biosphere is a true gem that needs to be preserved not only for the many endemic species it contains, but also for the local community which directly benefits and lives from the mountain's gifts. Be ready for the ultimate trekking experience. Come and discover Rwenzori, the Mountains of the Moon located in Uganda, the Pearl of Africa.
Thank you very much. Welcome back from Mountain Rwenzori and Mountain Rwenzori National Park. I think you've seen why we are the Pearl of Africa. Certainly, it's a challenge that has been called that until you've been able to scale the mountain, you have not yet seen what Uganda is about. So, Madame Rosemary, I'm challenging you to a climb. Thank you very much. As we go to the next presenter, I want us to keep it extremely brief, but insightful and enjoying. We're going to have Mr. David Dury. Mr. David Dury is a scientist in forestry, in biodiversity, rural landscape, and he has been at this game for more than 11 years. Thank you very much, Mr. David Dury. It's your time to come and speak to us about greening the tourism sector in Uganda.
Thank you, moderator. The Minister of State, Tourism, Wildlife, Antiquities, the Permanent Secretary, the Ministry, the UN resident representative, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen. It's quite exciting for me to come and talk immediately after this energizer, having been somebody who climbed the Rwenzori Mountains up to Margarita Peak. One thing people don't talk about their experience in the Rwenzoris is that as you get to the point of going to the Margarita Peak, you have to do rock climbing using ropes, and nobody teaches you. You learn it there and then, and that's when you see men and women cry in their local languages. Very interesting. So, when I'm talking about greening tourism in Uganda, I don't want you to think it is an abstract or a myth. It's a reality. It's about the resource base of tourism, how you sustain it, and how you might get the best out of it. So it's basically about maintaining the growth in tourism, balancing it with the environmental conservation and protection, ensuring social well-being of the people and the community along the value chain. Along the value chain, I want to emphasize this. The value chain for tourism is quite long, and it has been emphasized here in many of these presentations, but you need equitable sharing of those values along the value chain. Practical things that relate to greening tourism. First, you have to reduce. You have to reuse. You have to recycle. What is all this you are reducing, reusing, and recycle? Is the materials and the commodities that enhances tourism. Very important. Protecting our cultural and natural heritage. Cultural, natural heritage, very important. These are the basis of our green tourism in this country, endured with. We know about the Kasubi tombs. What happened to the Kasubi tombs so many years ago? We all cried. It's now a World Heritage Site. It has transited from being a cultural heritage to a World Heritage. The buildings, what happened to Makerere University? Many of us who studied from Makerere, when it caught fire, what did we feel? It's a heritage. It's a building, it's just a building. But it's something that people will come and see. And from it you harness economic and social development in tourism. Very important. Now, we talk about the things that we know. Protected areas, their habitats, and the species they are in, endangered, threatened, and all this. All this has got to be enhanced to ensure greening tourism in this country. Now, what does it take then? And I say this is not a myth, this is a reality, because it's happening in many parts in the world. Certified sustainable tourism, certification of the products, of the resources, of the services that come from tourism. We have certification bodies. In this country, we have the Forest Council stewardship. We have the national standards for certification of forest products. When I see this product here, this is a forest resource product. Where is it coming from? Is it coming from an area which is sustainably managed? Is it being processed to this product in a sustainable way? Are the machineries that are being used to process all those things you see on your tables, the carvings and what, are they sustainably managed? That is what it means by certification. If a tourist comes and takes this and it's a certified product, he's not going to be asked or embarrassed at the ports, at the airports, because it is certified. It's a global system. Promoting responsible and consumptive production in tourism, very important. The structures, the infrastructure must be, reducing the consumption. The water, the food. I'm giving another example, reducing the footprint, the carbon footprint. We're talking about global warming because of the carbon footprint. Tourism itself constitutes globally 8% of the global warming, global greenhouse gas emission. And yet only 17% of people who use aviation transport are tourists. So it's a high intensity carbon footprint industry. So how do we reduce on that? In our travels, in our housing, energy usage, recycling. Do we need to have pylons, electric wires going through our protected areas, entangling our giraffes and birds flying? Or do we need to go into mini-grids or off-grid solutions in those places so that our facilities are self-centered and generating the electricity, preserving the water and reusing the water within there so that it is sustainable? This is all about what we're going to talk about. When I was carrying this bottle around, I didn't want to be mistaken for carrying my chapati in the jacket. But I just wanted to demonstrate something. That is a water bottle. I can use it for many years. I don't need to use that bottle, the plastic bottles. So how do we reduce on the plastic pollution within our tourism our value chain? Very important. So when we talk about non-consumptive tourism, we are talking about regeneration of that resource, restoration of the landscape, and bringing it to the quality that can sustain for generations to come. That's what we are talking about. The wildlife habitats, creating them. Some people think that wildlife habitats are only in the park and in the savannas. You can do that in your compound. Have trees, have fruits. You will see birds come and wake you up every morning. They become part of your family. You will see monkeys come. I already have about 4 families of monkeys in my compound, and I'm actually talking. I see Masaba there. Please come and take some of them away. They're becoming too many. But I've created that habitat in my compound, in my vicinities. The children of my neighbors come and watch the mountain, these birds and these monkeys. So non-consumptive, but it has to be regenerated and created. In protected area-based tourism, our tourism is basically about protected areas. It's nature-based, very important. How do we regulate and make sure that nature-based is enhanced? Use of pesticides, regulated or stopped. The monitoring of our water, the animal health, the interaction of animal and people, and the health. We're talking about COVID right now. Where does it come from? Is that interface? Very important. Now, extractive consumption. It's not only that tourism can only be done by greening it up, absolutely. No, it's not possible. There are consumptive uses. So, for example, the hunting quarters. There are people who like hunting, traditionally. And even now, they buy guns and want to do hunting. But this has got to be guided by science and information. Knowing the carrying capacity, knowing which age group should be hunted, and where, and when, and which period. What is the impact of that on the ecology? and the overall population. So regeneration quotas, very important. The predator and relationship with the prey, very, very important. Community-based tourism, that's what we have been talking about here. So much getting into the heart of the local person, the person who's getting that dollar, doesn't even know the exchange rate, but just very excited that she has handled a dollar. Very important. How do you bring that enhancement of satisfaction? Physical satisfaction, emotional satisfaction derived from tourism. Very important. So what are the strategies that we need to do as a country? Now, these strategies can involve two ways. There are voluntary strategies that I, you, and everybody can volunteer, that we are moving on a green path. And those ones which are involuntary, that you have to be forced to do it through regulations and policies. So it's good to establish the ethics and conduct to guide tourism. Globally, we have that system, but we need to adapt it in our own environment here, so that the standards are there for governments, for business tour operators, developers, travel agents, the workers in the hotels. You know the basic things that you need to do. Let me just tell you, one time I was driving in one of the parks in Uganda. I wasn't driving, the driver was taking us. And we are not tourists, we were really developing a project for wildlife conservation. Now, as we are driving, some guinea fowl, about 4 of them, crossed the drive track. And this driver accelerated. We said, no, don't. He almost caused an accident. He thought there was another problem. And yet he was accelerating to run over the guinea fowls. So we stop and say, no, don't do this again. And when we were coming out of the gate, we had to tell the rangers at the gate what happened, the experiences we had. So these are really about the code of conduct. And goes back to what I talk about certification. Certification of our services. If you have drivers who are certified to drive tourists, to guide tourists, you will not have this kind of experience. Accreditation and certification, yeah. I talk about products. I illustrated it here. I talk about service, drivers, hoteliers, and guides. The facilities. The facilities. Imagine, you go to a tourist facility, and the number of air conditioning things in the hotel is even more than the number of workers in that hotel. How do you feel? Could you have designed that building in a different way that allows air ventilation, and we have a very good climate around the world? You can create any temperature in this country without having an air conditioner. So that is the certification and accreditation. Means of transport, buses, and the tourism vehicles that we use, these 4-wheel drive, Land Cruisers, gasoline, diesels, fossil fuel. Can you have hybrid? Can you have, battery-driven vehicles? Silent, not causing noise in the park. Can we have balloons? You go sit in a balloon and you go silently and see the animals. That's about greening. Regulatory strategies, I talk about licensing. We need to look at that. If a tourist flies from Europe to Australia, back to Europe, to Uganda, have you tracked how he has traveled and what he has caused to the world by his travel? Do you hold him accountable for that? We need to get to that level. Audits. The accountants have talked about audits here. Important, checking that we are having compliance with the standards which are set. So, all these are there, but what are the opportunities that we have as a country? We talk about Rwenzori, Skidepo, and so many places. We need to tap into that. You can imagine the statistic given, Rwenzori versus Kilimanjaro, it's just unbelievable. We can do more. Our nature-based tourism, is the basis of our greening the tourism. 100%. From an altitude of 600 meters above sea level in the Semilikis to 5,109 on top of the Rwenzoris, you have everything that you want to see around the world here in Uganda. You have everything. You challenge me for that, we can go for it. Or equivalent, you can say we don't have sharks, we don't have what? We don't have those big water bodies, which can, but we have fish of different types. Water-based tourism. 2/3 of this country has enough water-based water bodies that can be harnessed into tourism. 2/3. And fresh water, by the way. Opportunity. The hotels using organic products. What's wrong with selling tomatoes in your hotel, which is organic? Engineered, vertical integration business. By your own business. You have a farm, you get your organic tomatoes, chicken, and what? Give to your visitors. Prime recovery of products. And that can also go ahead to improve our agricultural systems, that we move away from pesticides and agrochemicals into more organic to supply them. Then the policies and political support. Very important. We talk about financing and a lot of revenue that is generated by tourism in the right time. How much of that is plowed back into developing the sector? So, for WWF and other players in enhancing green tourism, we look at flagship species. Those are species that anybody around the world will say, I would go there and have a look at them. When you're talking about lion, you're talking about lion that climb the trees. You're talking about elephants, you have 2 different types of elephants. The one which is huge in the savannah and the small one in the forest. Forest elephants. You're talking about the great apes, so many. We have the chimps, we have the gorillas, those are big. But how many monkeys do we have? How many monkey species do we have in this country? So many. Actually, the highest population of primates are here in Uganda, not anywhere else. Diversification, we talked about that. Community tourism, we talked about. Certifying gorilla tourism. This is a special tourism. And we are already working on it with IGCP. We need to certify our gorilla tourism and the products out of it. Barriers. There are some people who don't want to hear something that bothers them. They look at this reality I'm talking about as a bother. It is not a bother. So prioritizing on that green tourism must be an important, it's a barrier. We talked about commitment in terms of financing and having a specific delivery strategy to drive us in the direction of what? Green tourism. Best practices, sometimes commercializing this tourism. We have that situation in some parts of East Africa, where a lion has got a prey with his pride, and you have 5 land cruisers around it. Honestly, that kind of practice is not in line with green tourism. Climate-associated hazards, this is serious. Physically, we are experiencing it in our infrastructure and even in the seasonality of production of other things that support tourism. This is a barrier. This is something we need to specifically handle. So, key recommendations from me. We need a holistic strategy that drives green tourism. Look at urban and cultural tourism. The marketing of the less known areas. We just talk about Rwenzori, but we have Elgon, we have Muhavura, we have Kadam. All of them offer very different and unique products. We have water bodies, the Crater Lakes in Western Uganda, so many of them. Very exciting sites, by the way. And there are people who have ventured into those and they're making a kill. And yet there are thousands of them. Hundreds, actually. equator line, just crossing many places in this country. Many. Just from Kasese, you get somewhere there, you get in Masaka Road, you continue, you are just in equator. You say, but how big is this country? Yet very small. So that's about diversification. Skilled human resource. Skilled. Let's not take tourism as a by the way, where you just go and earn money and you feel comfortable. No, we need skilled people. So this has got to be very important. Wildlife, no tourists would want to come to a place where, on the international media, 13 lions have been poisoned and killed. What are you going to see? This has got to be handled. I talk about standards and benchmarking. I talk about certification. I'm not going to include on that. But I want to emphasize a few things, like honey, like tea, like coffee. Like our those are the things our visitors like. Why don't you capitalize on that? Produce them at scale and certify them. Take them even to the farms that are producing it. That's another diversification of our tourism. Marketing, green destination. Specifically, green destination. Market it. Lillian, I'm not going to elaborate on that. That's your job. Then finally, policy regulations and interconnectivity with the different sectors. We are talking about inclusive tourism, but it has to be inclusive also in the frameworks that supports it. We have to get a listening ear to that. So things like community benefits, things like extractives of oil and gas in protected areas is something we need to talk about. Wildlife enterprises and green jobs, nature-based solutions that enhance that creativity and sustenance of tourism is what we stand for. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, David, the Country Director, Worldwide Fund for Nature, for bringing home and unpacking what seems to be complex in terms of greening to be able to be understood by the sector players. Certainly, the consumer outside there is looking at green products. They're looking at sustainable products. It's a niche that we can be able to market ourselves as such. And I think the presentation has been very clear and well understood. And as members, we'll be able to ask a few questions. Some people are asking, when are we asking questions? I'm going to give you some little bit of time to ask those questions. Thank you very much, David. I may not be able to go through the whole paper, but I would want to say that standardization, certification, and legislation or policy directions can bring us to where we want to go. That's where we can be able to start from. And before I invite Stephen, I would want to thank UNDP for the video that we watched just before David came to present. We were able to see, David says people cry. When I was looking at the movie, call it the video, I saw the CEO of Uganda Tourism Board smiling at the mountain, not crying. So is it that she climbed a different mountain from the one you're talking about? When she was at the peak, I saw she was only smiling at the mountain. So we need to look at the context of crying. Otherwise, I was scared to climb. Now I am motivated to climb because I saw people smiling up the mountain. Thank you very much. I want to invite Stephen. Stephen, when Stephen speaks, I don't want to speak again. because he's such a great orator. And because of that, I'm going to give him strictly very few minutes to excite the crowd and tell us what is it that is there in policy that the private sector foundation would want to guide this. Stephen, you're most welcome. Thank you. Stephen is very strict on SOPs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kawere. When someone wants to cheat on your time, they say he's strict on time. He's basically telling you have nothing left. I remove my mask for a second and recognize our minister, Honorable Martin Bahinduka, Deputy Rep, Madam Gatia, my chairman, PS directors, my sister Lily, all of you distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my colleague hosts and fellow panelists. My name is Stephen Asimwe. I work for Private Sector Foundation, but I'm also just a few years behind my sister Lily. So I'm stuck between promoting tourism and discussing a very scientific paper called equitability. It is so scientific that that's why I used some sanitizer, which is 100% alcohol. So that what I have taken in, if I make mistakes, blame it on the alcohol. If I speak very well, I take responsibility. But just for purposes of this discussion, I think most of the things have been covered. And I don't want to really go back. I think all the papers have been very exhaustive. Mine is going to be slightly provocative, and I'll agree with my brother, Dr. Muvaola, my OB, with the chairman in Mwiri. He was in Navikamba, I was in Willis. Where were you? Okay, this is World Tourism Day, no, it's not about competition of schools. But the subject that I was given was equitability in tourism sector in Uganda. So just for purposes of context and defining what we are discussing, I think equity is the principle of sustainable tourism that addresses fairness in access, use, distribution of goods and benefits from the tourism development to meet the needs of both current and future generations. And this definition was given to us by the United Nations World Commission on Environment and Development. And just to put this thing in context, tourism has been growing over the years. I think we saw a huge curve after the Second World War, when people decided now to get out of what was now a growing industrial revolution. And it created a need for people to visit other countries. But along the way, I think from the United Nations side, they noticed that, yes, there was a growing economic activity, but not all of it was coming down. So they came up with this definition of trying to see the equitability or access to the money that comes from this. And so in their definition, they looked at what they called intergenerational, meaning between the equity in the development, and then they had another definition of intra, from within. They're looking at North America and Europe and us in the South, and then between countries. Now, because I don't want to go into the depth of this discussion, as I had said earlier, if we are looking at current and future generations, I want us to look at what is our population today. And I'm happy our senior colleague is here from National Planning Authority. Our population is about, what, 44 million people. I was just doing a small, quick search. In 1955, Uganda had a population of 5.8 million, thereabout, plus or minus. At independence, we had close to 7 million people. In 1980, we went up to 12 million. Right now, in 45 million people. From the little search I did, by 2030, we're going to have a population of 60 million people, thereabout, plus or minus. Now, I must warn you very early, Ugandans are very productive people. We have the highest fertility rate in the world. I had a whisper here, the Basoga are very good. I don't know. I went to school there for many years, so I think I know a bit of that. By 2050, ladies and gentlemen, Uganda will have a population of 90 million people, plus or minus. Now, please put that in perspective. Please put that in perspective. I was around in 1980. I wasn't around in 1955. But just to give you another perspective, again, I was doing this quickly as I sat there, was the issue of, where did I put my notes? The problem of speaking last, you get a scattered presentation. In 1800, the whole world had a population of 26 million elephants. 26 million elephants, almost half the size of Uganda. By 1900, the population of elephants had fallen to 10 million. By 1950, the world had a population of 5 million. And currently, I was searching Mr. Dooley's website on WWF, both Indian and African elephants, we had anywhere between 40,000 to 2050. So what am I saying? I'm trying to show the growth of population and either the fall or demise of our ecosystem. So when we're talking about equitability in the tourism sector in Uganda, we are not hiding away from the fact that we have a fast-growing population against a shrinking environmental, you can put there any words you want, catastrophe, debacle, gross crash, whatever you want to call it. And I think that for me, this meeting and probably the discussion today should focus on where we are going. How are we going to manage, protect, preserve, harness, and integrate our planning process for tourism in the context of a growing population? I grew up in that beautiful mountain which my sister climbed. I grew up actually on the foothills of the Rwenzori Mountains in a small town called Kilembe before joining our famous schools. In those days, in the early 70s, I think we had snow down in Kilembe. 3 of my sisters were born in Kilembe Hospital. I went to a nearby school, which was beautiful. We had it was like the Switzerland of Africa. Because of climate change and the way we have behaved as a globe, not as Uganda only, that catastrophe has started to hit us. I went back during my UTB days, I think it was 2014, 2015, and unfortunately, I could not find the school where we went, one, but also the hospital where my sisters were born, because the floods had taken this and swept away everything. The place was dilapidated, the mines had been destroyed, and obviously, we can only think of putting up a museum to show what it was before. So what am I saying here? I think there is an urgent need for us to start thinking 20, 30, 40 years from now as a means of protecting what is essentially the most beautiful part of the world. Uganda is home to 45% of Africa's biodiversity. It is home to one of the rare species. I think you saw the three-horned chameleon. Very, very rare species. Uganda is home also to the world's largest cultural diversity per square inch. We have 64 tribes and language groups. That area of Rwenzori alone, the Albertine area, occupies, I think I saw some statistics from there, it actually controls 39% of Africa's biodiversity. So that Rwenzori area is the richest place on earth. But the rate at which we are destroying it calls for us to intervene. So therefore, I think for me, equitability needs some very,